welcome to your video tutorial on industry study. Today we're going to have a look at the second section of industry study, which is technical considerations in the industry. In this video tutorial, we're going to cover mechanization, mass production, automation, and specialization versus diversification or generalization. So what do we mean by mechanization? Well, essentially mechanization means replacing processes that are carried out normally by manual labor by a machine. However, that machine performs the same or very similar function. The key thing with mechanization that students often get confused with is they think, oh, okay, just replace human labor. And it's not exactly the case. The point that you have to be really aware of is that a user still needs to be actually in control of the machine. But the difference being that the power or the grunt or the heavy lifting actually comes from a machine rather than directly from the user. So an example of mechanization is a battery drill. So it's a mechanism that is operated by a human being. However, all the grunt work actually is taken over by the mechanism rather than using, in this example, a manually powered drill. Some really good advantages of mechanization. It means that because you are using a machine or a mechanism to actually engage in the production process, it's usually a lot more specific and a lot more consistent, so you get a greater quality of goods. And also because of that, more goods are able to usually be produced in a shorter amount of time because a machine is actually doing the hard, the grunt work in inverted commas. The advantage of mechanization is because a machine is being used to do the grunt work, templates can often be used to, setting up and marking out times that would normally be done with manual labor are pretty much reduced. So, that machine can operated by a human being can do so within a template. So, marking up and cutting times are dramatically reduced. Some disadvantages are that there is usually an initial cost or a setup cost of purchasing the machines that is really quite high. What it'll also mean as a result of, mechanizing the business, while you are essentially still using the workers, you probably the grunt work requires a lot less. So you'll probably have a bit of a loss of jobs of manual workers, and the workers that are there or do retain their jobs will have to be retrained. Another disadvantage of mechanization, while it's fantastic at producing, goods and costing less and doing things more efficiently, some of the time the cost of maintenance and the high cost of repairs of that machine means it can be a disadvantage to the business. Automation, on the other hand, is where people are totally replaced by automatic machines or robots, which are typically, not always, but typically controlled for accuracy. So unlike mechanization, where it was a mechanism but still required a human being, automation nearly completely removes the human being from the process. Human beings can be, still used to initiate a process or, start something. But automation, in terms of the production process, nearly entirely removes a human being. So this can greatly improve speed, quality, production times, because if you no longer require a human being to operate the machine or, to work on manual labor, there's no longer a concept of, hours and breaks. You can actually work around the clock in terms of your business. So some advantages include the fact that with automation, you can obviously produce a lot more. There's increased productivity. Excuse me. There's increased productivity because, you don't really need someone, you don't really need a worker there all the time. So you can work throughout the night. Because they're controlled by computers, these machines a lot of the time, there's more efficient use of materials, so there's less chance of human error being involved. For those who are involved, however, there's usually shorter work hours in terms of labour because they're only involved in a very small part or, of that production process. So be it, for example, inserting the timber into the machine, it's much shorter labour hours. And a lot of the time, particularly when it's dangerous tasks, automation also, a key advantage is the fact that worker safety is increased because there's no longer human beings doing the manual labour. or involved with the machine that is conducting necessarily the manual conducting the manual labor for the most part. Some disadvantages obviously include the fact that will be lost as workers no longer have the same level of involvement in the process. Also, with machinery, quite a large amount of money or a high level of capital is needed to purchase purchase the machines for automation, and also the ongoing maintenance costs. So a large amount of money is needed upfront and ongoingly in order to be able to maintain the equipment, initially purchase and then maintain that equipment. The last thing, and it's probably more relevant to the timber industry, but another process with automation, because it is so specific and so efficient, that there's sometimes a bit of a loss in individuality of the produced items. We talk about it being more efficient use of materials because there's less human error. Sometimes that human error, particularly on, say, bespoke furniture, for example, can really mean it adds character to the piece. And I suppose one disadvantage of automation is because there is less of that, there is less character or individuality or personality, some might say, in the produced items. The next concept you need to understand is mass production. So it kind of combines a level of automation and or mechanization. So it's kind of combining these last two concepts we've just gone through. And mass production is the large scale production of goods in a factory. So, you might mass produce like 4 or 5 different types of products out of your factory. You might mass produce only the one. Basically, it's looking at producing large volumes of items. So that might be large volumes of seating and tables, and you produce lots and lots and lots of them. So with mass production, you obviously require a pretty large assembly line. It has workers, except those workers are organized to just perform 1 or 2 operations over and over and over again so that you can produce goods on a large scale. If you had those workers, those skilled workers, in charge of a number of tasks, obviously you wouldn't be able to produce on the same level. So mass production is the large scale production of goods. That might be one, that might be a couple, that might be a handful of things produced on scale. So the advantages of mass production in terms of efficiency, it means that you can produce massive amounts of stuff in less time. Because you're looking at producing on such a large scale, less time is usually taken to produce goods because you have that production line really tightly organized. So it's really, really well organized. With people only doing one task or 1 or 2 tasks over and over and over again. So you're able to really quickly produce more items in a shorter amount of time. What usually works out, like we spoke about in structural factors, is with mass production, you're able to get economies of scale. So that fixed unit price for the item or items that you're mass producing is dramatically reduced because you are producing so many of them, or you're producing it's cheaper, to make products because you're producing on such a large scale. Now, your workers who are only completing, say 1 or 2 tasks rather than 10 or 15, need therefore minimal training. So that example that we were using back in structural factors and a while ago of, a person on the assembly line with quality control, your role in the mass production of, say, Freddo frogs might be just checking the shape and size, and that's what you do all day. Therefore, some disadvantages with mass production are, particularly for workers who are often involved along the assembly line, is that there's a lot of boredom usually. So, in mass production, human labour is used a lot of the time to look at that quality control stuff, which we were looking at in structural factors. But because they're doing the one task, it's usually pretty boring and they have pretty low job satisfaction. Because those workers are doing the same task over and over and over again, there's usually an increased risk of RSI or repetitive strain injury, because often there is a movement that they'll be repeating time and time again, which can cause strain for the workers. The last thing I suppose that's important to note as well, because that really organised, very tight production line is set up, with machinery and with workers engaged in certain parts of the assembly line. Once your product is designed and that assembly line is created around the production of that item, it's pretty difficult to change the product design once everything's set up. So, if you wanted to change part of the product design, you'll have to restructure that whole assembly line. So it's not so easy to change that after the fact. In terms of what you actually produce technically, your company can either specialize or it can generalize or diversify. So if your company chooses to, your business chooses to specialize, this means that they only concentrate on one type of product. Now, the really good thing at just doing one thing means that, so say you mass produce one item, or, say you on a smaller scale, so you don't even have to mass produce. On a smaller scale, you just produce one item, you'll also get that economy of scale, because the raw materials that you need and the processes that you need to use are all the same, because you're only specializing in making the one thing. That means that you can purchase raw materials usually in bulk, and whenever you're purchasing things in bulk, you obviously get it cheaper. The other good thing about about specializing in just the one particular or the one particular item or one particular product means that your workers often need less training and they need less diverse skills. So it's greater opportunity for success a lot of the time, because if you do one thing and you do that one thing really, really well, you can just keep on repeating that time and time and time again. A clear disadvantage, though, for specialization is, while all of these things are great, they work really well once people want to actually buy your product. So if you remember back to structural, when we were looking at marketing and sales, everything's linked to, will someone actually buy the product that you're producing, or is there actually demand for the product? So specialization is great when the market's good, but if the market goes down and no one really wants to, have that service or buy that product, then you have no supplementary income. There's nothing else coming in. If you can't sell your product, your business will essentially go down. So the opposite of specialization is generalization or diversification, and this is where your business manufactures a variety of different goods or services. So obviously, your advantage is the opposite of specialization, which means that there's less market risk. So should one thing that you're making no longer have market demand, or one particular service you're offering no longer have market demand, you've got a lot of others to fall back on. A clear disadvantage, though, because you've got your hands in, and the phrase is, hands in many baskets, or, fingers in many pies, because you're dealing with a large range of different things, some of the time that you could result in reduced quality, because you've got so much to focus on. And it's obviously a lot more complex than specialization, because you're producing a diverse range of products, so it's usually a lot complex, and there's a lot of different parts to take care of, as opposed to just specializing in one particular thing. And that's it, guys. They're the concepts that you need to understand for the first few dot points of technical factors.